music of the Final Fantasy series stands out as some of the most celebrated music in video games, period. Since 1987, we've been treated to some of the best melodically rich, deeply thematic, musically diverse, and outright incredible and timeless songs, irrespective of the platform that they've been on. Nobuo Uematsu's pioneering compositions, along with the contributions of other talented composers that have come along since, have made the music of Final Fantasy some of the most beloved and iconic songs in the history of video games. So in today's video, we're going to be ranking some of the music of the Final Fantasy series. I'm super excited because I love Final Fantasy's music. As usual, before we get to the list, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Over 93% of the people that watch my channel are not subscribed, so support your smaller content creators and hit like and subscribe. It does make a difference. Comment down below, let me know your thoughts on the list. Do you agree with the ranking and the order? If not, hey, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. Let's go. So as usual, no MMOs in this video. I just don't have enough experience to speak on them. I will say everybody raves about Final Fantasy XIV soundtrack, and I would love to actually visit that at some point. Okay, let's make our way down the list, starting with number 14, Final Fantasy I. Given the technological limitations of the NES, longtime series composer Nobuo Uematsu had to work within constraints of the system's sound chip. Despite these limitations, he managed to create rich and expressive compositions that pushed boundaries of what was possible within the hardware. And this goes for all of the NES Final Fantasies, not just number 1. He drew upon inspiration from various musical genres, including classical and rock music, from upbeat and adventurous tunes for exploring the world map to mysterious and atmospheric melodies for dungeons. The music complements the gameplay perfectly. Notable tracks for me from Final Fantasy I would be the Prelude introduced in this game, the Final Fantasy main theme, and Matoya's Cave. Next at number 13 is going to be Final Fantasy II. Compared to the first installment, the music of Final Fantasy II is often described as more complex and emotionally driven. Uematsu introduced a wider range of emotions and musical textures to better reflect the game's narrative and character development within it. I think in contrast to the first game, the overall soundtrack has a bit more of a melancholy tone to it, which is fitting considering the events of the game. I also believe that the music of Final Fantasy II is quite complex, but unfortunately limited by the sound chip on the NES. So when saying that, I would definitely recommend that you guys check out some of the orchestral arranged versions that do these songs more justice than unfortunately the NES can. Notable tracks here would be the Rebel Army theme, Battle Theme 2, and the main theme. Next up after number 13 is going to be Final Fantasy XII at number 12. Composed primarily by Hitoshi Sakimoto, the soundtrack of Final Fantasy XII offers a departure from the series' traditional sound or the style that we had been used to. While I personally really don't enjoy this game beyond Balthier, who's just so cool and mysterious, the soundtrack is orchestrally rich and does a great job in reflecting the game's epic scale and political narrative. All the music does for me is just set the stage. Not one true track was 100% standout for me, purely again because I really just didn't enjoy this game overall. But if you do, let me know what track you enjoyed the most. Notable tracks here would be the boss theme, the Dalmasca Easter Sand, and Battle with an Esper. Before we carry on, just want to let you guys know that none of these soundtracks are bad necessarily. I'm just ranking them in the order in which I enjoy them or prefer them the most. So leave a comment down below, let me know if you agree with this ranking. Or if not, how would you rank them? I'm interested to know. Anyway, number 11 is going to be Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III may not be as widely recognized for its music as some of the other entries in the series, but the soundtrack has a really unique sense of adventure to it. I would argue that the music might just be the best part of the game as well, with the job system being a close second. The way that these songs were arranged really bring out the richness of the NES sound chip. I feel at this point Nobuo Uematsu had really mastered the art of maximizing the potential of the system. Notable tracks here would be Eternal Wind, I really love that one, the Crystal Tower, and the Boundless Ocean. Next up at number 10 is going to be Final Fantasy XIII. Now, while I might not love Final Fantasy XIII as a game, I can confidently say that the music of Final Fantasy XIII, composed by Masashi Hamauzu, is great. Just like Final Fantasy XII, it's a clear departure from the series' traditional feel and vibe that you've been used to if you played 1 through 10, this time offering a more electronic, ambient vibe that partners really well with orchestral arrangements and instrumentation. Since Uematsu's departure as the main composer of the series after Final Fantasy X, musically the series had finally found a proper footing by the time that 13 came along. There's a lot of great tracks in this game, but overall I'm not a huge fan of the game, nor do I have a lot of emotional attachment or nostalgia for them, but like I said, there's a lot of great songs in here and they're worth listening to standalone. Notable tracks include Blinded by the Light, The Promise, and Sunleth Waterscape. Coming in at number 9 is going to be Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy V is a unique adventure that most of us in the West didn't get to play when it was first released, unfortunately. And it's a shame because there's so many great tracks present within the game that could have gained a lot of popularity early on in the game's life. There's themes of exploration, discovery, and heroism. These are all front and center here as Bartz and the gang uncover the mystery of the worlds. Yes, worlds, plural. I didn't experience the original game, but having played the Pixel Remaster as the first time that I actually played through this game, those arrangements were amazing, and going back and listening to the original, they are just as beautiful on the Super Nintendo as they are now. Notable tracks here would be Ahead on Our Way, that's a really great song, the classic Clash on the Big Bridge, and The Dragon Spreads Its Wings. Next up at spot number 8 is going to be Final Fantasy XVI. Final Fantasy XVI is a darker game in tone, and with that darkness comes a dark and epic soundtrack composed by Masayoshi Soken. Now, he's been praised for his work on 14, and I had expected a lot of good things, especially considering I don't have any experience with 14 or any of his other musical works, but people really praise him very heavily. I would say overall that this is a decent soundtrack with character themes and battle themes being the real standout tracks here. I do feel like the soundtrack, however, plays it safe, doesn't take too many risks, and ends up landing as probably second best post Uematsu OST behind 15, which we'll get to here soon. I want to say that it's too orchestral as well, which isn't a bad thing, but there's only so much you can do with this specific color palette. Notable tracks would be Find the Flame, On the Shoulders of Giants, and The Hideaway. I just mentioned it before, but next up at number 7 is going to be Final Fantasy 15. It's not often that we have one of the goats of video game composing step in for Final Fantasy, but when it's not Nobuo Uematsu, it's got to be Yoko Shimomura. Legendary. Final Fantasy 15 features a contemporary and cinematic sound, blending a lot of orchestral elements with rock, jazz, electronic influences, vocal and choral arrangements. They're all present here. It really gives the soundtrack a modern day feel. Yoko Shimomura's innovative compositions, along with the contributions of other composers and artists, it's very easy to tell that this has a distinctive and immersive musical experience that complements the game's setting and character-driven storytelling. So even if you disliked 15 as a game, it's hard to argue against the awesomeness that is the soundtrack of Final Fantasy 15. Notable tracks for me are Somnus, Valse di Fantastica, and Apocalypsis Noctis. Taking the number 6 spot is going to be Final Fantasy 4. I will always champion Final Fantasy IV. I love this game so much. This is the first great main character in a Final Fantasy game, the first great narrative in a Final Fantasy game, and the first properly epic soundtrack in a Final Fantasy game, with every track being great, no filler. Uematsu did a phenomenal job working with the SNES sound chip. And side note, the sounds of the Super Nintendo really just do it for me. I love it. The ambitions of the storytelling in this game allow the music to set the stage for the scale of the game, and it all starts with the Red Wings theme immediately adding gravitas and scale to the beginning of the journey. Standout tracks for me are Troane Beauty, Theme of Love, and of course the classic battle theme present here. Okay, it's getting good now. Number 5 spot is going to go to Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X features a number of emotional and melancholic themes that reflect the game's themes of loss, sacrifice, and redemption. Interestingly enough, this was the first time that Uematsu had any help in composing music for a Final Fantasy game, and sadly this would be his last contribution as a main composer for the series as well. The soundtrack is very atmospheric, doesn't call out too much attention to itself, but to be honest, it really perfectly suits the world and the characters that inhabit it. The soundtrack tastefully uses a lot of pads for ethereal vibes, and I love that as a kid. Partner the soundtrack with the voice acting, and it's easy to see why I was such a Tidus and Unisimp back in 2001, and you know what, I still kind of am. Notable tracks here among a lot of them, To Xanarkand, Tsuteki Dane, and Wandering Flame. Before we get to the last few on this list, guys, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Over 93% of you guys who watch my channel are not subscribed. So support your smaller content creators and hit that like and subscribe, because it actually does make a huge difference for smaller channels like me. Back to the list. All right, it's getting really good here, and for honestly the last few, it could go either way. But number 4 for me is going to be Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX has a lot going for it, and the music is just wonderful. Effortlessly charming and whimsical in nature, blending together a variety of styles that evoke a sense of nostalgia, fantasy, and adventure, which fits the game because this is kind of a love letter to the franchise in a way. Uematsu has claimed several times that Final Fantasy IX is his favorite work, as well as the one he's most proud of. I think the major takeaway from this soundtrack is that it's all very believable in a way where it actually sounds like this world with all of the different sounds used in the soundtrack. That's a lot of sounds, but yeah, it all aids in the thematic cohesiveness of the game. Don't underestimate the music in these games, people. So good. Notable tracks here would be A Place to Call Home, Vamo, Alla Flamenco, and Melodies of Life. Number 3 for me is a childhood favorite and one I probably played the most of growing up. It's going to be Final Fantasy VIII. Now it's getting good. I spent a large portion of my childhood playing Final Fantasy VIII, so the music holds a lot of nostalgic value to me. But aside from that, this was the first game in the series to really incorporate contemporary and ambient soundscapes, reflecting the game's modern and, of course, later in the game, futuristic setting. It all starts off with the classic Liberi Fatale, which is incredibly iconic. And then, of course, the soundtrack moves all over the place in a good way. It's symphonic, modern, soundscapey, poppy, and to be honest with you, this is Uematsu in his prime. There's so many great tracks here, it's hard to narrow it down to a few notable ones, but Fisherman's Horizon, Eyes on Me, and one of my favorites here, The Man with the Machine Gun. So good. Check the soundtrack out. All right, last two. It could go either way, honestly, come down to like a coin flip. But I think the number 2 spot I'm going to have to give to Final Fantasy VI. I don't care what you say. This is peak Super Nintendo music. What Uematsu was able to do with the music in this game is absolutely incredible. Starting with the opening scene of the Magitech armor walking towards the town of Narj, man, Uematsu is not playing around. At this point in the series, this was the best of the best, and some argue it still is. I could easily pick out what song is what based on the first few notes. Every track is incredibly memorable. There's so much personality here too, with all the character themes, town themes, battle themes. The soundtrack has it all. It manages to be incredibly diverse, yet has that overarching theme of hope baked well within the tracks. And if you're a prog fan like I am, there's a lot of prog undertones. It's so good. Notable songs here among all of them: Dancing Mad, Terra's Theme, and Aria de Mezzo Caratrere. Am I saying that right? I don't know. It's the opera song. You guys know what one that is. Okay, last one here, obviously, is going to be Final Fantasy VII. Yes, Final Fantasy VII. I can hear some of you guys rolling your eyes, but to me, this is the most timeless Final Fantasy soundtrack of them all, with not one bad song present within the game. This, along with 6, maybe even 7 more so, really transcends the game and has a life of its own outside the game. I would argue that this is easily the most iconic and influential soundtrack of the series as well. It features a blend of orchestral and rock influence arrangements that enhance the game's epic narrative and character-driven storytelling. Character-specific and location-specific themes that help to establish a unique musical identity for each character and setting really drive this game forward. Thematic elements like this enhance the storytelling and world-building aspects of Final Fantasy VII, aiding the timelessness and the unforgettableness of the music. I would also argue that the jump from the sound chip on the Super Nintendo, which was more or less like sample-based, to MIDI-based audio on the PlayStation, aided with a lot of different textures and sounds here, giving Uematsu a whole new color palette to play with. Notable songs from Final Fantasy VII include all of them. Yes, all of them. So there you have it. There's the list. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Hit the playlist here for more of my ranked videos, and we'll see you again on the next video. Thanks for watching.